Hey folks, it's me, Bo Wills. I'm standing here right off Scenic Highway 98 in Miramar Beach, Florida, overlooking the beautiful Gulf of Mexico, inviting you to check out episode number 2 of my podcast, What's the Big Idea with Bo Wills. In this episode, I sit down with Dr. Carolyn Zonia, who is running for a position on the Walton County Board of County Commissioners. I invited her in to talk about her candidacy and her vision as a potential commissioner here in Walton County. Check it out. Come from and your candidacy for the Walton County Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you so much, Bo, for having me and for doing this service for our community. I appreciate it.
Yes, well, it's my pleasure. Before we get started into the politics and what your vision looks like, can you tell me just a little bit about where you're from and what brought you here?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and I went to medical school in Iowa, did my training in emergency medicine in Michigan, and then moved to Chicago and worked in level 1 trauma centers in Chicago for a quarter of a century, and then had the opportunity to cut back and take a job working for the Army in an Army hospital ER. And as a child, we came here to visit in this area. At that time, we'd go to Fort Walton Beach. And then I've owned property in Destin, where I would vacation. So kind of looked anywhere from New Orleans to Apalachicola when we were moving here, but really the beauty of Walton is what drew us here. So
zoned in on Santa Rosa Beach, huh?
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. So, level 1 trauma, I don't know anything about emergency rooms and you know, that business at all, but tell me a little bit about that experience in a level 1 trauma in Chicago.
So that's what we kind of call the knife and gun club. So that's, you know, shootings, stabbings, motor vehicle accidents.
Wow, you worked there
with everything else, you know,
Sure.
all the other kinds of things. And, you know, right now in ERs everywhere, we're seeing a lot of the pandemic, of course.
Right. That's amazing. That experience must have been life-changing.
It was a dream of mine to become a physician, and God's blessed me in many ways.
Did you want to be in medicine as a young girl?
Yeah.
Is that just something that you always wanted to do?
It was a dream to be a doctor.
Well, that's awesome. So, and you're still practicing in emergency rooms today?
Yes. So I'm working on an Army base in Louisiana, Fort Polk. I work in their ER 1 weekend a month.
Okay.
So I feel like I'm serving the mission. I never was military. My dad was in the Army, but I feel like I'm definitely serving the mission, caring for not just, you know, enlisted and their family, but veterans that come there too.
Have you ever been in public service before?
Never. Now, I've always been a volunteer. I've always been a community advocate. I've always tried to use, you know, whatever resources I have to help my community. And I really see public service in this way, running for political office, as a kind of specialized community service that not everybody can do, obviously, but something that I think a lot of us, you know, I think a lot of people do consider stepping up. There's, you know, concerns and worries along the way, the public scrutiny that comes along with it.
Sure. How's that been so far in this election cycle, this campaign?
I think as a candidate, you expect public scrutiny. It's been interesting the way that some of that scrutiny has happened, because in some ways it almost seems like people don't want the voters to even have a choice. So, you know, people questioning, you know, my ideas about solving our problems. I haven't had a lot of that, but it's been a different kind of a scrutiny, you know, to try and somehow make people think that they should be afraid of me as a candidate.
Well, so what would you say? And I didn't research. I read your website quickly and sort of took away from it a few points. But what would you say, in your own words, are your top priorities as a county commissioner?
Well, I would say my number one priority would be preserving and protecting the things that make Walton County really special. Tourists come here because it reminds them of old Florida, because of the fact that we have forests, we have still those beautiful old Florida bungalows, right, along 30A and in parts of Point Washington and other places, that you can rent and experience, what old Florida was like. And we're running out of places like that because of development. I vowed early on in my campaign not to take money from developers, not because I'm against development,
Right.
but because I think it's very important that we have development that enhances our communities and not destroys them.
Can you give me an example of a community enhancing development in comparison with a destructive development?
Well, I think developments that enhance the community might be an area, for instance, like Rosemary Beach. I mean, look at the architecture there and, how, and Seaside, how they've made these walkable communities. There's restaurants, right? So those are a couple of areas that the development has enhanced the community. And then an example of a development, that has done the opposite would be to look at, like Driftwood Estates. The mistakes that were made in that development are going to cost taxpayers tens of millions of dollars to correct. And so that's what we want, or that's what I think we have to be very careful about when we're making decisions about development. The questions around the development that was proposed at Draper Lake. Those impacts, while we don't want to infringe on anyone's individual rights to develop their property, where does their right to develop property end when it ends up costing taxpayers tens of millions of dollars to fix the problems that are created by that development?
And the biggest impact from Driftwood, what would you say the biggest, or what would you say the mistakes that the developer was allowed to make? How would you list those mistakes or list those corrections that you would like to have seen happen for a development like Driftwood?
Well, I think we have to look very closely at what is the stormwater plan, and then where is that water draining? And if it's going untreated into the bay, that's having direct impacts on our economy and, fishing and pollution of the bay. So those are the kinds of questions that you have to ask yourself. We could get into another development that has not started yet, but the whole question about the Foreman estate.
Yeah, it's 280 something acres.
Almost 300 acres.
South of Chat Holly, north of 98.
Right.
Right. That is an interesting one. And I know they applied for a variance to put 4 units per acre instead of 2 units per acre in the residential preserve. And what is the density of Driftwood? I'm not sure. I wouldn't expect you to know. Yeah. It brings me to a comment that Mac Carpenter made. And, Mac, if you're watching, this is not a criticism, but, he said, and Mac, please call me and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Mac said something along the lines of, people are moving here whether, we want them to or not. And I think he used the word product to describe, that we needed housing, for these people. So, I would say that, what is the right development for an area that's right there south of Chat Holly, north of 98? It's not south of 98. It's not along, 30A. So those are the questions. Where should development occur? In South Walton, and Walton County is, proper, the rest of Walton County, but specifically because we're talking about the Foreman property, how should South Walton be treated in terms of doing exactly what you said, which I think is right. We want to preserve the natural state and the beauty of this, this area, but we also have to walk that balance between the drive for development. I mean, I don't think it's a conspiracy type drive, but it's certainly a force out there that people want to develop and be in that business. So
well, let's stick with the Foreman property, since that seems to be one I think that's been discussed a lot that people maybe can relate to. The way that was identified in our land use designation before the variance was granted was that would be conservation residential, so 60% of the vegetation would have to be preserved. By changing the land use designation, it allowed for almost 300 acres to be clear cut. Chat Holly, experiences some very significant flooding, and now you're going to clear cut all those trees. It's only going to worsen, the flooding there. And then how is that going to be managed when that's going to run right into the bay?
Well, I mean, if you ask me, is it a good idea to take 285 acres in Santa Rosa Beach and clear cut it? I think I don't know anybody that would say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. But I'm wondering if there's nuance in there, and I don't know the answer to this question, but I wonder if there's nuance there to say, okay, here's 282 acres. Let's do a Rosemary style development where it's high density here, but offset by low density and preservation, in these areas, the wetlands areas. I think I read on your website actually that Foreman Property was 47% wetlands. So again, would that be a good idea to think about it in terms of, the whole property is being rezoned or asked to be rezoned, but is there a compromise there where you could produce something a little higher density in some areas and keep, the preservation in other areas where, the concern is more?
Oh, that's exactly what I asked the commissioners to do in my testimony, was just don't change the land use designation. Don't allow this variance. Vote against the variance. Just, that's all that most of the, folks who are concerned about development, that's all we're asking our commissioners to do, is follow the comp plan.
Right.
Don't keep granting these variances, and ask why, really why. Because the Foreman property, I think it was 3 weeks after the land use designation was made, the Foreman property went up for sale. So, it makes it look like it was only to get the ability to be able to sell it at a higher price.
Right. Well, it probably was.
Yeah.
How do you get a neighborhood like Rosemary developed in an area like Chat Holly? Because I think the demand actually would be there. I think Santa Rosa Beach is such a high demand that you could put a Rosemary Seaside type development north of 98 in some undeveloped land, my opinion, but I think that could happen. So,
well, I think the questions that you're asking are good questions for us to, as commissioners, work with, the planning committee, design review, all of these people to talk about development. I'm not coming into this with any ideas about this is the kind of development I want to see, or this is, I don't want this kind of development.
I want you to think with a magic wand.
I don't have any preconceived ideas about that. I just know, people say that folks move to this area and they want to stop development. I don't want to stop development. I just want smart development. We're not desperate for development here.
Right.
We can raise the bar. And it's not really fair, I think, to people, you're a realtor. People save all their lives, dream about the home that they're going to buy, right? And then, having them buy property in a place that's a known floodplain, and then within a couple of years have their property flooded, go through all the expense and the heartbreak of rebuilding, only 4 years later to be flooded again. That's not really fair. No matter how much people want to come here, it's not fair to allow them to buy a house in a place that's going to just be heartbreak after heartbreak. Wouldn't you agree?
Totally agree. Growth is a difficult question. A lot of people's livelihoods, it's not just the developers, a lot of people's livelihoods. And I'm not even talking about realtors, because quite frankly, if development slowed, it would raise prices. And as long as you're a working real estate agent, you kind of ebb and flow with the market. But, builders and all the people associated with the construction industry and development industry, they make a probably a pretty good living around here and don't want to see it, come to a stop. And I do think
I don't want to see it come to a stop either.
yeah, I do think that is a concern that some people have.
Well,
But it's a tricky conversation to have because
Right.
there's no black and white right answer.
and I think you would agree, and I know as I've gone around the county talking to people, folks have agreed with me that we are not good stewards of this God-given beauty that we have here.
I think that
Water quality, right, development, infrastructure, right?
I don't have enough information about the water quality, and maybe you do. I don't know what the testing has shown that our water quality has dropped. I know that when the red tide rolls in, it gets talked about, and it should, because it's quite it makes an impression on you to have that burning lung feeling when you're just walking down the beach. But I really would like to know. I really would like some quantification as to, hey, how are we doing with our water control? If you ask other commissioners, which I did when they were candidates, the message was that they thought that it was being stewarded quite well. Now, I don't know. I would love to know if, maybe that's another episode for another day as a water quality specialist to, really dig in and tell us what that looks like. I don't have an opinion on it because I don't know, and I would like to know. I would like to know, some sort of measure.
Well, that leads into, another goal of mine as commissioner is to develop some new committees. There's a lot of expertise in our county. And, I think those folks don't want to go through all the work of running for office to apply that expertise, but if they could actually participate on a committee where they could, share some of their observations, knowledge, suggestions, and, we could utilize that expertise to help us make some of these decisions, water quality.
I think you're right. We should tap into the brain trust running around here, such that there is one,
Yeah.
hopefully.
I agree.
Another thing that I found on your website that I really wanted to talk to you about was transportation. Because I think transportation is locked into other issues that the citizens of Walton County want someone to solve and fix. And I pulled up the graphic on your website, and can't see this, but it's the draft, the 2040 mobility plan, and people riding transit plan for South Walton. I think Seaside put on a symposium.
Yes.
And this was one of the graphics that came out about that. Did you like the plan that Seaside proposed? Obviously, you've got it on your website. You must think that it's a positive thing.
Yeah, I think we need to be very forward-thinking here, especially as a coastal community, what our solutions are to traffic, especially around 30A. I think we have a great opportunity there to, champion some public transit, the use of these autonomous vehicles, and especially not overreacting to numbers of cars on the road, because generation Y and Z, they are not buying cars like my generation did. And so I think you're going to see the number of cars actually going down, and people who come here on vacation are used to using public transit, using zip cars and some of these other things. So I think that we have a real opportunity to
Did you get a feeling from that symposium where that effort lie and actual execution? Was that purely conceptual planning? Were there next steps that we're going to be taking?
Well, that's where the commissioners would come in. So they do, studies. They've done 3 studies on whether to add an additional connector road between 30A and 98. So spent about $1 million, in the last decade with 3 studies to look at whether to add another road going through Point Washington State Forest. And, they get the study, and, you saw from my website that we actually testified at that meeting at the Dune Lakes Elementary School that was held about whether to have an additional road through the forest or not.
Right. I think that your position was basically it wouldn't add much in terms of saving time if you were traveling the span of 30A, and it may increase traffic on 30A as well.
The study showed that.
The study showed
So the
that,
study that the commissioners paid for, their own specialty people who did this study actually said it would increase traffic on 30A.
Right. You know, how do you get people to quit driving their car? You know, you can't just tell them you're not allowed to drive your car when you come down here. You have to have an option for them to get around and be mobile, for them to feel comfortable parking their car. It's got to work. I lived in Breckenridge, Colorado for a little while, and they had a great transit system that ran all across Summit County. Every 15 minutes you could catch a bus from 5 in the morning till 11:30 at night, over the Rocky Mountains, through the snow, down the interstate. I believe that if they can do it, we can do it. I just don't understand what the bottleneck is. I don't understand why, you know, everyone I've spoken to says, oh, you know, they've been talking about this for 30 years, study after study, nothing ever gets accomplished. Why is that? Why is that? Do you have an opinion on why that is?
Maybe you need to elect different commissioners.
Right, okay.
This is something I put on my website. This is something that I want to champion. This is something that I will get done.
Right. Do you know how you're going to get it done? I mean, just pushing as hard as you can and not giving up. But I mean, is there a clear pathway? You know, step A, B, and C, and we've got a transportation bureau that works, or whatever you want to call it.
I think there's a clear pathway. Obviously, you know, there's 5 commissioners, and you have to all work together on this. But I think there's a clear pathway.
Well, transportation is a huge issue for me, because I think that it really, again, interlocks into you know, other issues that we care about, like
Quality of life.
quality of life.
Yeah.
How did the symposium guess at how many employees would be needed to, you know, to have a transportation system that worked?
No,
Yeah.
they didn't talk about that.
And I think that's another area of concern for this area is the labor pool. We want to attract businesses. We want to attract industry. But when industry takes a look at this area, I think they say, well, where are we going to hire people from? So, you know, do you have any thoughts about that? About, you know, in line with bringing jobs? You know, it sounds great. Diversify from tourism. Let's diversify our economy. Bring other types of jobs here. But, you know, where are the people that are going to work these jobs coming from?
I think that's a great observation, Bo, because a lot of times candidates will say, I'm going to create jobs. Well, we have an office in Walton County. The Economic Development Alliance is an office that works to bring industry and jobs to Walton County. So there's already, you know, part of our government that's working on that. My interest is in taking people who are low-wage earners and helping them get training to plug into high-paying careers, so that now you've started on a track where there's upward mobility in a career. And my plan is to partner with Northwest Florida State College for Walton Works. They have almost 200 certificate programs. There's funding available to help people get the money to get this training, and then once you've got the training, you know, we're talking about $20 to $25 an hour jobs. Right now is the time to be putting the effort in that, because we've got several thousand people in our own county that are out of work, right? With the pandemic, you know, our unemployment rate shot up to 15%. Our unemployment before the pandemic was at a historic low of 2.4%. Now, our unemployment rate has recovered, you know, since the governor has reopened the state, but there's still thousands of people in our own county that are out of work. Now is the time for them to be able to go and get some of this training and get these higher paying jobs. So that is, again, something through the commissioner's office that I would champion, and I feel very passionate about.
I hate to even bring it up, customary use, because there's no real point in talking about it. It's going to be deliberated in courts for quite some time, beachfront owners are not going to all of a sudden allow people to, come onto their beach and enjoy it the way that customary use proponents think that they should be able to. So do you have anything you really want to say about customary use? I mean, please do if you'd like to.
Yes, I think that there's three approaches to the problem of customary use. One is HB 631 prescribed a way through the courts for us to proceed in Walton County, and we're doing that as a county. But HB 631 was a bill that was passed and signed by Governor Scott. Senator George Gaynor is planning to introduce legislation to overturn HB 631 in this next legislative session in 2021. So you can work on customary use through the courts. You can work on customary use through legislation, just like it was changed through legislation. You can work on it through legislation. And then the third is a ballot amendment to change our Constitution. Every election, we see these ballot amendments come up that ask the voters, would you like to change the Constitution of Florida so that it allows for, this or that? And we can do the same thing with customary use. We could have a ballot amendment where every voter in the state could vote whether they think the beaches in Florida should be public. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to work on customary use.
And is that your position, that the beaches should be public?
Yes, I think access and use of the beaches for recreation is key to our economy, to continuing to have good investments in our houses, right? And certainly for our quality of life. And it's an issue that everyone feels passionately about. And as I've gone around the county, even talking to people in Mossy Head and Laurel Hill and Paxton and, everywhere, people want to know that they can drive down and go to the beach and they're not, going to be restricted. So it's something that's important,
It is
as we
important.
said, to our quality of life and everybody across the county.
Is there anything on well, let me ask you this. When the pandemic hit and the governor passed an ordinance closing down short-term rentals, it became aware to me that the county doesn't have the right to do that, which then brought up this notion of home rule. Are you familiar with home rule?
Yes.
Okay. It seems to me a lot of the things that I care about as just a citizen of Walton County are really controlled at the state level. And, the TDC, how the TDC spends money, the TDC, I'm sure that the people at the TDC are great. I'm not talking about the employees of the TDC, but it seems like promoting Walton County beaches has got to be the easiest marketing job that anyone's ever had. And, it's important. I think it needs to be, done, but I don't understand why the TDC extracts so much money through bed taxes from what I consider to be natural resources of this environment, and then it's so restrictive as to where it can be spent towards the benefit of the people who actually live here and who are impacted by the activities that extract that value out of the natural resource.
Yeah.
So, you talk about other committees that you may form or whatnot. Would you push the idea of a ballot amendment to change how the TDC can spend money in Walton County?
Well, that's not something that we could do locally. You need to interview Representative Drake and Senator Gaynor.
Right, but you could advocate for that.
Talk to our representatives, in Tallahassee and ask them for sure. Yeah, I think, now you're starting to see, Bo, how, right, you have a voice, right, and who you vote for and who your representatives are at every level, has an impact on your day-to-day, right, quality of life. So. And
it seems a lot of it is controlled in Tallahassee, which I understand. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
No, but there's things that we can do here.
Right. I don't like the idea that we just throw our hands up and say, well, that's just the way it is because it's too hard to change.
I agree with you there. I agree with you 100% there. There's about 55,000 registered voters in Walton County, and any of them could do nothing. You elect your commissioners to do something,
Something, right?
and hopefully, to find the solution that maybe nobody even considered. Yeah, I agree with you. Those issues, and I keep trying to remind people I'm not running for president. So,
Right.
there are lots of issues here in Walton County to talk about, and that's what's filling my time.
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am, Doctor. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about while we're sitting here?
Well, let me look, because I made a few notes.
Please.
As we talked about growth, water quality, jobs, traffic solutions. Oh, so after school.
Okay.
So this was interesting. So I did a non-scientific survey of Walton County voters, asking them, what they thought the top issues were. And I was surprised to find that 3 out of 4 voters said after-school programs for youth. Because we all know what a great job our schools do. We have really wonderful schools in Walton County. And we have very good subscription after-school programs. But a lot of families cannot afford, right, that money every week for the kids to either be in the SPICE program in the schools or to go to the Boys and Girls Club after school. And we just don't have a lot of opportunities, especially for older youth, to hang out. And so they end up hanging out in places where they get in trouble, and that has long-term consequences, right, for your life if you have, get in trouble at Walmart, right? So I was very touched at the primaries that so many of the candidates talked about this and brought this up, but I think that that's an area for real development, opportunities not just for recreation, but opportunities for mentoring and opportunities for, creative outlets. The kids today are just, real good with their cameras doing videos, or, whether the kids want to be involved in dance or theater or something like that.
Right.
Having some opportunities like that. And there are grants available, and there's places around the county that we could do this. I've been to all 21 precincts, and almost all of them have their own community center. This could be a place for, some youth opportunities at the community centers in these different precincts.
Right.
And that's what I've heard from folks around the county, is that, they understand that, there's limited resources, but they just want to know that their kids are going to get a better opportunity.
Well, speaking as a parent with 2
Yeah.
kids, I can tell you it does resonate with me. We are part of a lot of those subscription services with music lessons and sports and that sort of thing. And I think that it's a pain, a growing pain. A lot of people moving to the area, a lot of younger families with younger kids, and they're thinking about these things. What do I do with my children after school on the weekends? And there are limited options available. A community center would be awesome, even if it were another field to play sports on, because I can tell you the Dune Lakes fields have been awesome, but they get used up already. They get used quite a bit already, and we need another facility already.
Yeah.
So good luck with that. Should you be elected, good luck with that. And I really, really appreciate you coming in and speaking with me about this. If there's anything else you'd like to say, we'll wrap it up here.
Oh, I appreciate the time too. Hopefully I can earn your vote.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thanks. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
Thank you, Bo.
Yes, ma'am.